First weakness of the book, in my view, the main weakness, is that the whole story, all the images and characters, primarily come out of one emotional stance. There's like one mood which is quite narrow and limiting, but that narrow emotional attitude has given rise to everything, almost everything that is in the book that we get. This is a review of the book Lessons in Chemistry, written by Garmus. The book tells the story of Elizabeth Zott, who is a very strong-minded, hyper-rational, honest, and almost naively honest, self-reliant female scientist. She's a chemist, but through a series of accidents, she ends up hosting a TV show about cooking. So she ends up being the host of a kind of instructional afternoon TV show. She's described also as very beautiful, very attractive, but in general, she is at odds with the world, or at least with the American society and culture of her time, 1950s and 60s, with the pervasive gender discrimination, and also because she doesn't play political games of being diplomatic, pleasing her superior, people who are superior professionally to her. And so as a result, she finds herself not in a weak position. I don't want to use the word weak, but she ends up in a position that is unsupported by others, unsupported by professional community. A big part of the book is also about the love story between Elizabeth and another character, Calvin Evans, who is also a scientist and a kindred spirit. And we go through how they learn about each other, how they develop an intimacy that is partly based on getting to know each other's personal histories. And that's really important to highlight, how intimacy is about, it's about many different things, but it's partly about getting to know the history of another person, how that history is related to their present moment. I won't tell you everything that happens to these characters. I don't want to spoil your reading experience, and I won't mention all the other characters. I'll just add that Elizabeth also has a dog, and we get some of the story through the dog's perspective, which was kind of interesting. What I liked about the book, the main thing that I liked about the book was the writing. The writing is pleasant, more or less pleasant, easy to read. So at the level of sentences, the mechanics of language use, I liked the book. I also liked some of the lines, like the catchphrase at the end of the TV show episodes, the cooking show. At the end of every episode, she ends the episode by saying, "Children, set the table. Your mother needs a moment to herself." That there's something interesting about that line. Maybe because it is about the recognition of the mother as a person, that she has been working on preparing dinner. Now, children, at least maybe you can do something. Set the table, give her a moment for herself. Now, what I don't like about the book, the first weakness of the book, in my view, the main weakness, is that the whole story, all the images and characters, primarily come out of one emotional stance. There's like one mood which is quite narrow and limiting, but that narrow emotional attitude has given rise to everything, almost everything that is in the book that we get. So what is that emotional stance? It is that emotion or feeling when you're dealing with idiots, essentially. So imagine that you have a bad day, and in that day you had to deal with 4, 5, 6 people who just lacked common sense, that you would describe as idiots. So your emotion as a result is something you could describe as irritation. You're very irritated, you're annoyed, and you feel impatient. Your patience is lost, is gone. You're totally out of patience. The story is told around that feeling. She creates a character who represents a person, who represents that attitude towards the world. She gives us a very intelligent character who is bombarded by idiots and their lack of understanding, by the fact that there are all these people around Elizabeth, the main character. They all take for granted all the mistakes of the culture of their time, including gender discrimination. So I said bombarded by idiots. you might ask yourself, or you might wonder, you might want to ask me or the author, what an idiot is. What is an idiot? For our purpose, an idiot is not someone who doesn't understand science or doesn't understand a specialty field like chemistry. That's not a good definition of an idiot. An idiot is someone who doesn't understand the depth of mundane activities, doesn't realize that there is a depth to everyday experiences, like, for example, like cooking. Somebody who treats cooking in a completely superficial way is an idiot, according to the logic of this book, which I happen to agree with. So everything that we deal with during a day, just pick any kind of everyday mundane activity, having a conversation. If it is superficial, it wouldn't do justice to what we are capable of as human being. Treating people at work, making decisions about other people's careers who we have some kind of power over. If we do those things, if we make our decisions, if we take action based on superficial understanding, if we don't examine our assumptions, we end up acting as idiots. So in other words, by treating everything superficially, the so-called idiots miss some very obvious things, miss or ignore, neglect some very obvious problems. And you see how this relates to the theme of feminism, the imbalanced or differential treatment of men and women. It's quite obvious, but most people miss it because it fits into their existing habits of thought, habits of action. It has become habitual to them, and because they don't examine habitual things, because they leave everything superficial, they never get to question the differential treatment of men and women. I like that this is examined. The theme of idiocy is itself good, but the reaction to it, the emotional reaction to it, has captured too much of this, of the book, and hasn't left room to explore and to explore a larger field, a larger world, and has limited the book very drastically. Okay. The second thing I don't like about the book is related to my first point, and that is the undeveloped characters. Characters simply do not develop much over time. And this reminded me a lot of Ayn Rand's style of writing. If you've read The Fountainhead, for example, you'll know what I mean. Elizabeth Zott is a certain way. She has always been that way, different from most people. She's rational, very hyper-rational, and she's independent. She thinks for herself. Okay, that's fine, but tell us how she became like that. There's no turning point in the story. Needless to say, she was not a baby scientist, right? When she was a baby, she was not self-reliant and independent and rational. When she was a kid, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, there's no catalyst in the story. There's no point where she acquires her characteristics. She's a scientist, and that's it. And something very telling, she does something that is extremely telling of this attitude. At one point in the story, she compares being a scientist to being gay. I think at least in this book, the author, Bonnie Garmus, takes genetics to be the basis of Elizabeth Zott and everything that is good about her character, everything that is admirable. It all has a genetics basis, as it comes from her nature as opposed to nurture. She and Calvin Evans, they have chemistry. And the first time they see each other, their encounter has the character of a chemical reaction. And the author embraces that. Nothing is developed between them as human beings, as in human individuals, human persons. Their love at first sight is based on their innate natures. This goes hand in hand, like the admiration of nature, natural things, the nature of the characters, and their lack of development, lack of change over time, ties in with her pessimism and negativity in response to cultural practices. So, for example, there's a point where she criticizes the hypocrisy of little girls telling each other secrets, the cultural practice of sharing secrets. Let's say two girls are talking. One of them says, "Keep this a secret, but I have a crush on this boy. And tacitly, she's expecting the other girl, the recipient of the secret, to carry the message to that boy, to deliver this secret as a message. So if you honestly keep it a secret, keep what you just received, you are breaking the norms of that kind of cultural practice. Another cultural practice that is criticized, I think, is how bridesmaids wear, or are supposed to, they're expected to wear unattractive dresses to highlight the beauty of the bride. Marriage is kind of frowned upon by Elizabeth Zott. Adopting the husband's name, which I kind of agree with. Religion is treated, or maybe unfairly treated, in a very overgeneralized way as a set of funny beliefs. And our author, Bonnie Garmus, doesn't acknowledge the fact that science has to do with culture too. Science is a cultural practice, and it is culturally transmitted across generations. It is maintained as a cultural practice by a cultural community. It is a cultural achievement, not unlike religion. The third thing I didn't like about the book is just not having enough descriptions. Bonnie Garmus tells us that Elizabeth is good at making complex scientific ideas accessible and entertaining. Oh yeah? Like what? What? Give us an example. The source of the problem, I think, is the author trying to capture a character that is beyond herself, characters that is very different. And this character of Elizabeth understands things which are presumably beyond our author's grasp. That's fine. Trying to do that is extremely risky. It could work if the character is created in a way that has a life of its own, in this case, her own. It should become so complex that it's almost independent of you, the author. But because, as I said, the creative emotion behind this book is quite narrow, so what we get is, unfortunately, not very multidimensional. The central character of the book is, we don't get enough of her, and what we get is not rich enough, and it is not consistent enough. That's what I think about the book. I liked it more than reading Colleen Hoover's books just because of the language. I appreciated her writing style, but the storytelling is not strong. Anyways, that's it for now. Check out my Patreon page if you are interested in supporting the group. I have a book club that meets once every 2 weeks. If you also like to support the channel, like and subscribe, I will be very grateful. And otherwise, take care, and I will speak with you in future videos. Thank you.